Ambassador, screening process as the first phase of the accession negotiations starts in the coming days. Is there a clear picture what this process means in terms of time frame and outcome?
Well, thanks, Vladimir, for this opportunity to talk to you. Let's just back up and look at what the negotiations, the accession negotiations, actually mean in themselves. As you know, in order to join the European Union, this country will have to undergo a comprehensive set of reforms. Everything from agriculture to trade, economy, jobs, rule of law, the fight against corruption. And that's in order to ensure that when you do join, the citizens have the same benefits that citizens within the European Union already enjoy. And also to ensure that you can compete within the European Union's, for example, its single market of 450 million people, on an equal footing. So it's really a comprehensive process of reform. So where are we now? The 19th of July, we were able to open negotiations. The very next day, the screening process was kicked off in Brussels. Since then, the government has put together its negotiating team. And in Brussels, we have moved the discussions among the member states to a working group which is specialized on accession negotiations. And in fact, next week they'll be coming here to meet with all of the interlocutors here. And next week, on the 15th, there will be launched the in detailed screening process in Brussels. So what you see is a momentum is beginning. What is the screening itself? Because this is the process, as your question, as you raise in your question. So screening is basically designed to look at all of the laws and practices that exist within the European Union and to see what needs to be done to bring the country up to those standards, to ensure that the laws are passed, implemented, and enforced for the reasons I just gave you. This process is now underway. Next week, we will go into some of the details. And the first issues that will be raised, because as you know, in the negotiation process, issues are put together in themes, what we call clusters. The first will be the so-called fundamentals, which means the rule of law, the fight against corruption, public administration reform, and public finance management. So this whole process now is gathering steam and moving ahead.
What about the time frame that we are talking about?
Yes, about a time frame. I mean, you're talking about, it's difficult to say, it depends how intensive the engagement is, but you're talking over a year for this screening period.
Mm-hmm. Accession talks have started, as you mentioned, but to finalize this so-called opening phase, there is a need for completion of the constitutional amendments to include the Bulgarians. From your European Union perspective, how much of this is feasible, having in mind the numbers in the parliament and ВМРО-ДПМНЕ's position?
I mean, the first thing I would say, of course, this decision on the constitution is a sovereign decision for the country to make, so it's up to the country. This said, I mean, the country already has a good record on inter-ethnic relations, some regard it as a model, and this constitutional change would further strengthen what you've already done. But I think, again, we need to step back a little bit and ask ourselves, what is the strategic goal that this country is trying to achieve? And we know that comes from pretty much across the political spectrum. The goal is accession to the European Union as soon as possible. And as I said, that requires enormous amount of investment and engagement. If that's the goal, if that's the strategic goal, and given, as you say, that in order to proceed, these constitutional changes need to be made, and that there is a commitment that already exists, one has to ask, what is the advantage of going down this road? Does this advance, does it indeed advance the European integration agenda? And I remember that when this issue of the constitutional change was first discussed, which was way back last year, there was not opposition from across the political spectrum. It was pretty silent on this particular question.
Mm-hmm. But ВМРО-ДПМНЕ is now not just against constitutional changes, but also is initiating a referendum procedure against the Good Neighbourly Relations Agreement with Bulgaria. What is your view on these latest developments? Because your opposition claims that this agreement with Bulgaria is the, I'm quoting, the basis for Bulgaria's nationalistic demands and source of all problems for Macedonia.
Well, going back again to the strategic goal of the country, which is to join the European Union as soon as possible, in order to do so, it's going to require enormous efforts. the whole of government, the whole of the civil service, Parliament, including the opposition, from across the political spectrum, civil society, business, citizens, everyone is going to have to be engaged in this process. Because what it's about improving living standards. It's about creating jobs, stopping the hemorrhage of young people leaving the country. It's about fighting corruption, strengthening the country, its democratic credentials, its rule of law. These are practical issues which bring real benefits. And so what I would say is it's important that the focus is here on this accession process, because the way is open, and now it's for the country to deliver on the different reforms. On the issue of good neighbourly relations, yes, you're absolutely right. Good neighbourly relations are an essential part of the accession process. And the European Union has said on a number of occasions that the implementation of the Treaty on Friendship with Bulgaria, as well as the Prespa Treaty, both of those need to be implemented in good faith by everyone. Any initiative which might constitute a backward step, hindering the country's path on the European integration path, really should be avoided. So let's focus on the key issue, which is the accession process itself.
To go back on European Union territory, so to speak, why the Frontex agreement that is supposed to be translated in Macedonian language is still not signed? Because Bulgaria has accepted to remove its objections upon adoption of the General Affairs Council conclusions.
Frontex, which you remember, is the EU's border and coast guard agency. And you're quite right. For some time now, the agreement establishing Frontex in the country has not advanced because of a disagreement on the reference to the Macedonian language. Well, and you're again right, that following the agreement which resulted in the opening of negotiations in July, that difficulty is now resolved. There is in fact no delay. Over the summer, the technical negotiations resumed, and we're very much committed to ensuring that this agreement is cleared, signed off as soon as possible. And when it's published, it will be published in the 24 EU languages, as well as in the Macedonian language, all of these versions being treated as equally valid.
2 weeks ago, Open Balkans leaders have asked for European Union assistance in overcoming the energy crisis. Is it realistic to expect this kind of help from European Union to the Western Balkans?
People in North Macedonia and people in the European Union are going through a similar situation where there are dramatically rising energy prices and the cost of living in itself is going up very much so. So we need to be in this together. We have, of course, for many years been providing significant support to North Macedonia in the energy field, not least in perhaps the biggest challenge of our time, which is tackling climate change. So in the green energy transition, we've, for example, have been supporting renewables, solar and wind. We are currently providing support for energy efficiency in public buildings in many cities across the country, and we're also supporting issues such as gas as a transition through gas connectors through to Serbia and through to Kosovo. So that support is ongoing. But of course, you're talking about the immediate concerns. Extensive discussions are going on in the European Union. Even today, Friday, the ministers of energy in the EU side are meeting to discuss how to go forward. And it's clear that solutions that are developed for the European Union, it'll be important that these are joined up with solutions for here. And that's why the European Commission, when it proposed this common energy platform, which is designed to bring the member states together with the possibilities of joint purchasing of gas or hydrogen, coordinating infrastructure, working together, basically, they immediately said that indeed North Macedonia should be part of that. So I think the important thing is now as we go forward, as within the European Union, we look for solutions and how to address these concerns, that we keep this conversation going and that we work closely together.
European Union has invested significant funds supporting the development of the country, but it seems like that it's not well known and recognized by, I would say, a good portion of the citizens. How do you plan to rebuild the image of European Union in North Macedonia that has been additionally, I would say, damaged by political and public relations over the so-called French proposal?
We have provided very substantial support for the country. In the last 20 years, it's in the region, a ballpark figure of about 2 billion euros. It's very significant. And I challenge you to go to almost any part of the country and not find significant EU support, whether it's from agriculture, through water schemes, running through to the environment, education, rule of law. We can talk about that at great length. I mean, we do have quite a lot of material that shows there is significant understanding that the European Union is by far and away the largest donor to the country. But this said, we can always do much better. But I agree with you. The reputation of the European Union has been damaged as a result of the delays in opening negotiations. And me and my colleagues, and I know a number of my fellow ambassadors from EU member states, have been reaching out to people across the country, talking about their impressions, talking about their feelings, and listening. That's an important part. And I think what people need, the message we're getting, is what people need is reassurance. Reassurance that this process of accession is moving ahead and the country is really moving in the right direction. Reassurance that in the process of accession, the country will be judged on how it's doing on reforms and not on any other factors. And reassurance that if the country is not advancing on reforms or if there's backsliding, that we in the European Union, as well as others, are ready to speak out on those issues. So we will very much focus on that. As I've said throughout this interview, we're now developing a momentum. And despite the very difficult circumstances in which we are living, the COVID pandemic still not completely over, the war in Ukraine, the cost of living crisis, despite all of these difficulties, I think there is ground for optimism because as of July, we've finally managed to open negotiation. The country is on track to join the European Union. What we need to see now is everyone coming together, trying to heal the divisions, working together and focusing on this national project of joining the European Union as soon as possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.